As you might have guessed, I love thrifting and flea markets. Obviously, it's in the name of the channel, right? Well, a couple of weekends ago, I ran across something at the thrift store that had a particular meaning to me. I joked on the thumbnail of the record albums video that there was a connection between a kid with chocolate all over his face and Slayer's Raining Blood. I was, of course, being facetious with that. But this, I actually have a real connection to this thing. Ready? Drum roll! Ta-da! It's a LaserDisc. What the heck is a LaserDisc? And why do I have any connection to it? And what does any of this have to do with Star Trek? Well, I'll explain, but first let's go back in time a little bit and talk about the crazy idea of mechanical television. Don't worry, this will all make sense, I promise. But only if you hit that subscribe button. So, go on. I'll wait. Did you do it? All right, let's do this. So, mechanical television. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds with this, but the earliest method for transmitting moving images used something called a nipkow disc. Patented in 1884, it was a spinning disc with graduated holes in a spiral pattern that spun past a lamp. As each hole moved past the light, it would change in brightness corresponding to the brightness of that line of an image. Then the next one would go by, so on and so forth. And it did this really, really fast. Television would make use of this in the 20s by using another matching disc on the camera, and both discs would be synchronized. A Scottish engineer named John Logie Baird, who was the father of television, had been working on sending basic mechanical television signals wirelessly, and he had seen some success with it. Well, they had already been converting audio signals to analog electronic signals and recording them onto discs. We covered this in the record albums video. It wasn't much of a stretch for Baird to come up with the idea of recording his mechanical video signal onto a disc, like the phonograph. The phonovision was born in 1927 as a result. So all the way back in the 20s, video was being recorded to discs. They were doing it even before Philo Farnsworth had built the first all-electronic television we all turned to as surrogate parents in the 80s and 90s. And oh my God, I'm almost 40. Now in 1964, RCA brought back the idea of putting analog television signals on a disc with their capacitance electronic disc, but it took them 17 years to get it to the market, and by the time it did, there were already 2 established recordable tape formats and the superior LaserDisc. Although, if I ever run across any CEDs at a player at a thrift store, I'll grab them and I will do a video about it. In 1978, Philips and Sony released these bad boys. They were initially also called MCA Disco Vision. That term kind of makes me think of the glasses in They Live, but instead of seeing aliens everywhere, you see bell-bottoms and polyester. And they were first launched exactly where you would expect a fancy new electronic thing like this to launch. That's right, Atlanta, Georgia. The technology that they used to encode the data was the foundation for the modern optical media we use today in CDs, Blu-ray, and DVDs. But what was crazy about it is rather than encoding it digitally, they used the same pits and lands to encode an analog signal. It had several advantages over tape. First, it had a higher fidelity and was able to reproduce the original video signal with almost no losses. Second, because no parts of the reader actually touched the disc surface, that superior quality didn't degrade over multiple playbacks. My favorite really, is the fact that the discs were the exact same form factor and packaging as the 12-inch vinyl records that were out, so they could be stored, displayed, and sold in the same pieces of furniture that had been used at home and in stores for decades. It also goes without saying that they didn't need to be rewound. Wow. So why weren't they successful? Well, they actually were, just not so much in the United States. They had a good share of the market in Japan and Southeast Asia. And a lot of people say that it was because of karaoke, and while that did give the format a little bit of a boost, it was the quality of it that really gave it the headway there. They actually had movie rental stores that were lined with LaserDiscs instead of videotapes like we had here. I would have loved to have walked through one of those places, although they never would have given rise to the phrase, "Be kind, please rewind." By the way, any of you know what the first movie released on LaserDisc was? I'll let you know at the end. I said earlier that quality is what made these popular in Japan, but that's not the whole story. The other factor is that companies agreed to keep the prices as low as possible to ensure the adoption of the new format in Japan. They didn't do that in the States, and as a result, the players were way more expensive, and they didn't offer enough of a quality upgrade to make up for the fact that LaserDisc couldn't record TV broadcasts, which was the main selling point of tapes. Why shell out money for a slight performance upgrade if you can't record the Super Bowl commercials? I mean, and the game too, I guess. LaserDisc did have a few niche markets here in the US all the way up to the mid-90s. The one I remember was educational films. The first time I ever saw one of these was in 8th grade science class. I don't really remember what we watched, but I was fascinated by the giant video disc that the teacher pulled out. But once DVD came out, that was it. Digital quality, CD size, and never having to flip the disc over in the middle of a movie? No contest. Did I mention that? You have to stand up and flip the disc over in the middle of your movie. Kind of a vibe killer when you have a dramatic scene and it just yells at you to stand up and do a chore. Now, before I tell you my connection with this, here's a kind of fun connection to vinyl records. Remember how I said that these are the same form factor as 12-inch vinyl records? Well, they even brought it full circle by putting out 7-inch LaserDisc that had music videos on them and were the same size as 45s, all the way down to the big hole in the middle. It was almost as if they planned it that way. I've always thought these were interesting in general, but the reason I bought this particular one is because it's the Patty Duke show. Not for Patty Duke, but the dad. Look. See the resemblance? Yeah, me neither. But this is William Schallert, just like me. We're related. Distantly, but it still counts, okay? He was my grandfather's cousin. He was also in one of my favorite Star Trek episodes, The Trouble with Tribbles. And he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild from 79 to 81. And that was cool because having the same name as him got me into a very strange and unexpected conversation with LeVar Burton and Brent Spiner at Comic-Con one time. That was weird. Now I have my eyes open for a LaserDisc player if I can get my hands on a working one. If I find one, I'll do a video about it and possibly do a side-by-side of VHS and DVD. That'd be kind of cool. By the way, the first movie released on LaserDisc was Jaws. Interestingly, the final release was in 2000, and it was Bringing Out the Dead starring Nicolas Cage, in case you're wondering what finally killed the format. But otherwise, that's it. I know that's not a lot, but at least this time I got to do some history. So if you enjoyed that, please subscribe to the channel and drop a like. And of course, stay metal.